Today we have a Caravelle, and it's got an A Shield 1950/51 movement. Belongs to my brother, and it appears it's not working, so we have to figure that out. And it's fully wound here, and it's still not running. And then we'll take the back off here. Now I'm just looking closer at the balance to see how it's operating. I'm going to take the power out of the mainspring. And we took the crown and stem off so we can get the movement out of the watch. And I'm going to align the hands so that I can remove them. We'll put plastic over the dial to protect the dial from damage as we remove the hands. Now I'm loosening the dial foot screws. And we'll put the dial in a little box for safekeeping. Now the hour wheel and the dial washer can come off. And now the screw on the ratchet wheel and the wheel of the barrel. The ratchet wheel is reverse threaded. Can't reach that screw with this tweezer, so I need to use Rodico. Now we'll pry up the barrel bridge here. And I had bought another movement to use in place of this one, so I'm only going to take off the pieces that I feel are needed to take off to replace with new pieces. This isn't going to be a full, complete service and reassembly. Some pieces fell out when I turned it over. I'm going to take off the plate covering the calendar works. Now, before I take this plate off the calendar, I cover it with plastic to hopefully not lose the spring, a little jumper spring in there. They like to disappear on me. Now, that plate that covers the cannon pinion and that wheel there just kind of flew off. And then I used a cannon pinion remover tool to pull that little gear off of the wheel. I believe I stripped that one down as far as I wanted to. And I moved on to the replacement movement. Here it is here. It's got a nice blue dial. I might reuse that if I can. Here I'm just taking a look at the balance to see how it moves and make sure it's the hairspring in the dial, or the hairspring in the balance staff seems to be good. Now we'll take the dial off of this one. The date wheel seems to be in a lot better shape on this one also, so we'll probably use that one instead of the old one. We'll put this dial in a box also to keep it safe. Or loosening the screws over the calendar works there. Now again, I did cover this one with plastic, but too late. I had lost the spring. You saw that little piece fly off to the right there. There was a spring behind that I could not find again. Luckily, I do have other movements that I can get those from, but I didn't cover it with plastic. And some hairs or something on that wheel there. Now we're going to make sure the power is down on this movement. And we'll finish taking apart the motion works, or the keyless works. It wasn't entirely necessary to cover it with plastic when removing that piece there, but there's a spring underneath it that I didn't want to lose, but it was in there pretty good. I'm just inspecting the parts to see if there's any undue wear. All right, now this is where I'm taking the yoke spring out, and I didn't want to lose that one. It's a little bit harder to lose that one than the calendar spring, the date spring. Taking the yoke out there and the sliding clutch and the can't remember what that piece is called. And now we'll start on the other side of the watch. We'll take the balance off just to keep it safe. Use a little bit of Rodico to get that screw. Here I'm just taking another look at the balance and hairspring to make sure it looks in good shape. Now we'll remove the wheel over the balance and the ratchet wheel, keeping in mind that the ratchet wheel is reverse threaded. Here I'm pointing out there's a bit of wear underneath where that ratchet wheel was. Just something to keep in mind that we might need to put a little extra oil there. Now I'm removing the click and the click spring. Now we'll take off the train of wheels bridge. And the barrel bridge. On this movement, all the screws for the bridges are pretty much the same size. Now, the barrel was kind of stuck into that bridge, so it required some additional force to get it separated later. The center wheel there is kind of bent over a little bit. Luckily, we do have the one from the original movement is nice and straight. Now, again, we're going to remove that little gear off of the one of the underside wheels that's friction fit in place. So now we can finish taking apart the train of wheels here. And finally, the pallet fork and its bridge. I didn't show it there, but there is the little screw that goes into the setting lever that needs to come out. Now we're taking apart the barrel here. Now we'll try to get the mainspring out. I'll get it out a little bit and hold it out with my thumb, and then get the tweezer underneath it. A couple of the bands there, and then just turn the barrel in my fingers as it comes, and it'll come out by itself until I have enough out, and then I can use my thumbs to walk it out the rest of the way without losing control of it. Now here you can see the mainspring is not laying flat, so it probably needs to be replaced if we were to reuse this movement. We have a fresh mainspring in the original watch that we'll just use that one. Now we'll put the balance back on the plate for washing. And there's all the parts laid out. Now halfway through this reassembly, I was using my microscope for most of it, and then the second half of the reassembly I was using a different camera, and it didn't work out very well, so the second half of the footage is not very good. First we'll put the barrel in that was already from the other watch, and then the escape wheel. And I mess around with a couple of these other wheels to try to figure out exactly how they go. A lot of people will take pictures of the movement as they take it apart so they know exactly how the wheels go back into place. And I have it on video, but I like to just see if I can figure it out without looking at it. If I run into a spot where I can't figure it out, then I'll look back at the video. I'm putting that setting lever screw or stem set screw in. And I'm putting the barrel bridge back on. And you'll notice I didn't take the spring and the click off the original barrel bridge. That watch was pretty much freshly cleaned, so I didn't feel there was any reason to clean it again. I'm taking that screw back off, and I'm going to put some grease on it. It's Mobius D or Microgliss DX. And now we'll put the train of wheels bridge on. And this usually takes a while, especially when you have so many wheels through one bridge. You have to fiddle around with it and get all the pivots into the correct jewel spots and make sure they're in the correct spot before you screw it down. Otherwise, you could break the pivots. It's kind of hard to see even on this microscope footage that whether or not the pinions are in the actual jewel holes. And then spinning the barrel, you can see it turns all the wheels, so everything seems to be in place. So now we'll screw that down. Another quick double check before I tighten these last screws down to make sure everything was still in place. So now I'll put a little Mobius 9010 on that spot for the ring that goes in on that little post there. And then the ratchet wheel on top of that. I think it's called a ratchet wheel. And I noticed I put it on upside down because it won't turn. So we'll take that back off and flip it over. Now we'll make sure the spring is in the correct spot. Covering it with plastic just to make sure it doesn't spring out of there. And then we'll put the wheel back on top of the barrel. And screw that down. And now we'll put the pallet fork in, being very careful with this because the pallet fork pinions are very small, easily damaged. And then we'll put the pallet fork bridge on. And we'll screw that down after we check it. Now we can put a bit of a wind in the watch to see if everything is working correctly. And we can test that by touching the pallet fork on each side to see if it springs back and forth. And it appears like it's working. So now we flip it over to oil these jewels on the pallet forks, which it's hard to show because it's so small. We put the smallest drop we can on the end of that pallet fork stone. If I can show you, you can see just a tiny bit there, and then we work the pallet fork back and forth 5 times and repeat that 3 times. Oil it and then work the pallet fork back and forth 5 times to get oil over each one of the teeth on the escape wheel. And now we're going to oil this bottom balance jewel. These things can be a bit fiddly, but they're much easier than other types. These ones are called Inca block. We'll just open it up on its hinge there. Then we can put the jewel chaton back in the hole. And now we can take the jewel, and we have to find which side is the flat side, and put a tiny drop of oil right in the middle of that jewel. And this is a very fiddly thing, so sometimes you mess up and you have to start over. I think I had to do it 3 times before I finally got it in there. See, I messed it up there. So I had to start over. Now I was checking to make sure I was using the flat side of the stone to put the oil on. Let's try this again. Now we have to carefully turn it over, and then I lost it again, so I have to start over again. And it's very easy to lose these stones also, or these rubies, because they are so small. Some people will oil the stone and put it on the chaton before they put the chaton back in the watch movement, and it's possible that might be easier. And now to close it, we just squeeze those underneath the lip there. had it, and then I popped it back out of place again. Now we flip the watch back over for the movement, and we'll continue on this side. Now we're going to put the balance back in, and this is where you hope it starts running again. Sometimes it's a little fiddly to get to the right spot. And there it goes. Doesn't have the jewel and the jewel chaton in there yet, but it's running. Now we need to open this side up and put that jewel setting and the cap jewel back in after we oil it, of course. There's the jewel setting for the chaton. Now, like we did on the back side, we have to put a small drop of Mobius 9010 in the center of that jewel and then place it on top of that chaton without messing that drop of oil up. And that one was a little bit easier to get into place. So now I'm just adding a little bit more 9010 on the various jeweled pivots on this side. Now we'll flip it back over and oil this side. seems to be running pretty well. And after the first test with my phone app, it was running at minus 122, and after some adjustment, it's at +8. And then after putting a full wind in the watch, it was running very well to my satisfaction, anyways. So now the quality of the video gets pretty bad from here on out. Now we're going to assemble the dial side of the watch here. I don't remember what oil I put there. It was either Mobius 9010 or D5. There's the cannon pinion. I think usually you put some D5 or 9010 on that cannon, the post that the cannon pinion goes over. This one I couldn't remember exactly where it goes, but I do figure it out. And I don't remember what that wheel is called, but it goes there, and then I take it off, I think, to add a little bit of oil to the post that it goes on. Actually, I need to put that friction fit piece back on that post there. I had to switch out to my steel tweezers for a little bit more force. I like using my brass ones a little bit better just because things don't ping off of them as easily as the steel ones for some reason. Now I'm putting some oil on that post. Sometimes those little wheels that I put in up before are beveled, so you have to be sure you put it in the right way. I don't think that one was, though. This plate goes over the cannon pinion and covers a couple other wheels to keep them in place. Then we'll screw that down. Now we'll add in the sliding clutch. And that wheel that goes on top of that, I don't remember what that's called. And I'm adding a little bit of Mobius Microgliss DX. Molycoat DX, that's what it's called. It's a heavy grease for between the interaction of that sliding clutch and that wheel. Now I'm putting the stem back in to hold those in place. And I can put that, whatever that thing's called, back in there. Maybe it's the setting lever. And now I'm testing it to make sure it works properly. which it's not, so I have to fiddle around with it to get that to work properly. There it goes. Now I'm putting the yoke back in and adding some of that Molykote DX to the yoke also, in between where the spring, the yoke spring hits it. And now we'll put the yoke spring in, I think. It's so washed out I can't tell. Yeah, the yoke spring. And you want to cover that with plastic just in case it pings off. And now we'll put the plate back over top of that. And it's got that arm on there that they call a spring also, but I don't remember what spring it exactly is called. Maybe the setting lever spring, something like that. Screw that down before we put that spring fully in place. Then we'll add a little bit of Molykote DX before we put that spring into place. It takes a lot of effort to put that into place. It feels like you're going to break it. Now I'm testing it a little bit to make sure the grease gets distributed and everything works. Now I'll put the date ring back on. Here's the tricky part where we got to put the little jumper thing in its spring back in place without losing it. And covering it with plastic to make sure I don't lose it. And then we have to put the plate back on, the cover plate. Sometimes this is a bit frustrating because that spring will fly out of place while you're trying to put the plate back on. Some movements have a hole in place there where you can put the spring in afterwards, but this one does not, so you have to carefully put that plate back in place. And I put the spring in backwards, so after all this work I have to come back and do it again, but I'll figure that out later. And now we'll put the screws in there. So now we'll put this hour wheel back on. And the dial washer. And what that dial washer is, it just keeps the hour wheel pressed down so it doesn't disengage with the gears there as the dial covers the hour wheel. Now I'm just checking to make sure the date changes over properly. Now I realize the spring is backwards, so I have to take that cover plate back off and change it around. Cover plate back on. Try not to mess that spring up. And now we'll check and see if the date function works properly this time. Appears to be working. So now we'll put the dial back on. And tighten the dial feet back down. And now we're going to put the hands on. You don't have to use a press like this. There are hand tools that they sell that work just fine for a considerably cheaper price. So I just scrolled it over until it changed the date, so I know it's right at around midnight. So then I put the hour hand at midnight. Press that on. You gotta check and make sure the hands are level and everything also. And now because we just changed it over to the next day, so it's still at midnight, so we want to line the hands up in that position. Depending on how long it takes to set that hand, you could maybe put it a minute or so later. I use a slightly smaller tip to press the minute hand on. And now I go through and make sure that the hands don't interfere with each other. And I think I also run it through to see how close to midnight the date switches over. So I think that is very good for that. Now we'll put the second sand on. Second sand doesn't matter as much where exactly you put it. Now we'll take the stem out and case the movement. I forgot to check and blow the movement with a little blower to make sure there's no hair or dust under it, but with that dial it's very hard to see if there was any anyways. I'm putting a bit of Molykote DX on the stem. We'll put that back in. Tighten that screw down. And we'll put the movement ring in. For the case back gasket, we put it in this round container that has lithium grease in it, and then we make sure that gasket is lubed up well with that grease. Keeps the gasket better and seals up better. And now we can put the case back on. Console Safety Champion 1974. Tighten it down with this little tool here. Setting the time and just double checking to make sure everything works properly. And there you have it.